Charles Dickens' masterpiece, A Tale of Two Cities, contains one of the most famous opening lines in all of literature. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But what was Dickens' intent or purpose in writing not only that line, but the whole novel itself? Welcome to this video about author intent and purpose. An author writes with a purpose, whether it's to persuade, inform, or entertain. Let's take a look. Do you like pie? I do. It doesn't matter what kind of pie you like, as long as you remember the 3 letters that make up pie. Because that's how you can remember the intent and purpose categories authors use most. The P stands for persuade, the I stands for inform, and the E stands for entertain. See? It's easy as pie. Now, let's take a closer look at the technique writers use to persuade, inform, and entertain. Now, it may seem really easy to determine whether the author means to persuade, inform, or entertain, but in some cases, it isn't. First, let's remember that writing encompasses a number of different fields. There are book authors, as we've noted. There are reporters who write for daily newspapers. Advertising and marketing representatives write on behalf of clients. In all cases, they're writing with an intent in mind. Let's start with persuasion. Persuasion nowadays takes a number of different forms. Companies use advertising and marketing to persuade the audience that their product is the best. Digital media platforms, in some cases, have a specific point of view and want to persuade their audience that they're right. Book authors work in the art of persuasion. Any number of diet books on the market seek to persuade you that their plan will work for you. One of the most popular books of all time relies on persuasion. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People tries to persuade you that you too can become more popular. Then there's inform. News reporters have been informing the public for centuries on the important news of the day, but novelists also inform. They inform by recounting important historical events or analyzing data and presenting evidence to back up the claims. Let's take a look at a few books that aim to inform. The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, explains in an informative way how the endless choices we have contribute to anxiety and depression. Any cookbook like The Joy of Cooking informs us how to use ingredients to make certain foods. And Flags of Our Fathers informs us about the story behind the most famous war photo in American history, the 6 men who raised the American flag at Iwo Jima. Lastly, we use writing to entertain. Entertain can have a number of different meanings. Look at it this way. If the writing has elicited an emotional response, you've probably been entertained. The famous newspaper columnist Dave Barry and the editorial cartoonist Mike Peters each entertain with dry humor. The humorist Will Rogers entertained with his wry observations that included, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. The classic To Kill a Mockingbird even entertains because it explores the injustices that happened during a time in American history. Persuade, inform, entertain. Remember, it's as easy as eating pie. So that's our look at an author's intent and purpose.
Separating fact from opinion can be a difficult task. In this video, we will discuss the distinction between fact and opinion and offer some helpful tips for distinguishing between the two. A fact is a statement that can be proven to be true by the use of evidence. Factual statements are true in all cases and for all people. In other words, facts are universal. Some examples include, dogs are mammals. Albany is the capital of New York. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth. Each of these statements is true. Furthermore, each statement is verifiable and not debatable, provided that definitions are agreed upon. Put simply, evidence exists that could potentially prove or disprove each claim. Opinions, unlike facts, are neither true nor false. An opinion can express a belief, attitude, value, judgment, or feeling. Some examples include, dogs are the best mammals in existence. Albany is the most interesting city in New York. World War II was a terrible war. Each of these statements expresses an opinion. Note that each is debatable. In other words, one can potentially agree or disagree with. debate, a statement of opinion. Note that the final statement, World War II was a terrible war, strikes many of us as factual. However, this is a statement of opinion. Yes, most people would consider World War II terrible. However, there is always the possibility that somebody out there holds a different opinion, as strange as they may seem. It is very rare for a statement with a value word like terrible to be factual. Now that we know the differences between a fact and an opinion, it's important to know how to distinguish between them when reading literature. Let's look at some helpful strategies. Watch for opinion masked as fact. A lot of times, professional or technical language can seem factual. In particular, you'll want to watch out for predictions. Predictions are opinions since they cannot be verified in the present. This is even true if the prediction is being expressed by an expert with an informed opinion. A zoologist who predicts that a particular animal will go extinct in 50 years, for example, is stating an informed opinion. This opinion is based on evidence, research, and expertise, but because it cannot be presently confirmed, it is not a fact. Value or judgment words often signal an opinion. LeBron James is very tall is a statement most people would agree with. However, the word very makes this problematic. What exactly does it mean to be very tall? It is not defined. What one person considers very tall, another may consider average or even short. The word very is an example of a value or judgment word. Here's a list of value and judgment words. If you see one of these in a statement, then the view being expressed is likely an opinion. Look for words like should or ought to. These words usually suggest a course of action or give advice. Though this advice may be advisable, it is rarely factual. No matter how much we agree with a should statement, it is by its very nature opinion. For instance, one should avoid smoking cigarettes may be sound advice with a lot of supporting evidence, but it is still an opinion. Smoking cigarettes can cause a variety of health ailments, on the other hand, can be verified and is therefore factual. In essence, facts can be verified by evidence, and opinions are statements of belief, attitude, value, judgment, or feeling. Before we go, let's look at a quick review question. Which of the following statements is factual? A. Ohio is a beautiful state. B. You should never drive faster than the speed limit. C. George Washington was the first president of the United States. Or D. George Washington was a great public speaker. The answer is C. This is the only option that can be backed up by evidence.
Hi, welcome to this video about allusion. Allusion is a literary device or figure of speech that refers back to a previous event, work, or story. Allusions are left unexplained and are often indirect, so it's up to the reader to piece together the meaning of an allusion using their own knowledge or research. Today, we'll look at some examples of allusion from literature before briefly discussing some ways you can use allusions to enhance your own writing. Now, like I mentioned, an important element of allusion is that it's a passing reference. It's left unexplained, relying instead on the knowledge of the reader to piece it together. As such, the writer trusts that the intended reader has the knowledge required to understand the allusion. For instance, in everyday speech, one might say, "Way to go, Romeo," without any sort of explanation as to what that phrase means. This is, of course, an allusion to Shakespeare's character from Romeo and Juliet that requires the listener to have knowledge of the play. Most of us do on some level, whether we've read the play or not. We know automatically that the person being called Romeo is in some way romantically involved, although the context is key in order to determine what exactly was meant by the phrase. If said with a sarcastic tone, for example, the speaker might be criticizing this person for doing something that is, in fact, very unromantic. Ultimately, Romeo is an allusion to a historical, literary work. Now, other allusions in everyday speech include, "Boy, you're a regular Einstein," or "Boy, this place is like the Garden of Eden." Most of us know that the person is not literally Einstein in this case, and that the place is not literally the Garden of Eden. Instead, we use our knowledge of Einstein, genius, right, and the Garden of Eden, perfect paradise, in order to interpret the speaker's intended meaning. Allusions are commonly used in literary works. Experienced authors refer back to Shakespeare quite often, for instance, or biblical events and Greek tragedies. These older sources are quite popular, though newer sources are also used. Before we get any further, let's look at some specific examples of allusions. Martin Luther King Jr. used the phrase 50 years ago in his I Have a Dream speech. This is a reference to President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which originally began 77 years ago. As you can see, King's phrasing is a subtle reference, hence an allusion. By doing this, he was able to accomplish a few things. One, it connects the civil rights movement with the abolition of slavery, thus showing the pressing nature of both, and suggesting that gaining equal rights is a crucial next step in terms of social progress. Two, it refers back to a moment in history of great significance. Three, it recalls, and by doing so, adopts the authority of President Lincoln. Another more modern example would be Big Brother. Big Brother is used quite often in writing and in everyday speech. Now, this refers to the always watching presence from George Orwell's 1984, which tells the story of a dystopian world under a constant state of government surveillance. When used in writing or speech, Big Brother is a way of referring to mass surveillance or governmental abuse of power. Note again, too, that this is understood if one is familiar with the plot of Orwell's novel. In this case, using Big Brother also functions as shorthand because it is much quicker to use this term than to get into a long discussion of government abuse and mass surveillance. Achilles' heel alludes to Homer's Iliad, the Greek epic. This epic's hero, Achilles, has one point of vulnerability: his heel. As such, references to Achilles' heel are often used to refer to a point of great vulnerability. This can be used jokingly. For example, one might say that chocolate is their Achilles' heel, which is, of course, an exaggeration. This might be a way of using an allusion to avoid saying something bland like, I really, really like chocolate. So what about using allusions in your own writing? There are several reasons for doing so. Firstly, allusions allow you to simplify ideas. Think back to the Big Brother example. This allows you to get your point across without going into a deep discussion about government surveillance and totalitarianism. In this way, the idea is both simplified, and you don't need to spend a lot of time explaining it. Secondly, alluding to events can create powerful parallels. Think back to the King example and his use of 50 years ago, the phrase which echoed Lincoln's phrase in the Gettysburg Address. Consider, for example, using similar phrases from history when writing a persuasive essay. If you're writing a persuasive essay with the goal of persuading readers to take action on climate change, then you might think of famous phrases or text from history and recycle or recall these phrases or ideas. Which famous phrases have been used in the past when fighting for social causes? These might just work as parallels for the present fight against global warming. And thirdly, a little rhetorical flourish can go a long way. Allusions usually make your writing more interesting. For one, they show knowledge of literature, history, and culture in general. In this way, you're able to produce credibility in your writing. You might know this as ethos. You, in a sense, become more trustworthy and authoritative. Now, while I wouldn't suggest simply showing off, many teachers and professors might find allusions to literary or historical sources impressive. As you can see, allusions are very useful literary devices or figures of speech used in everyday speech and writing. Learning to use them thoughtfully in your writing can really go a long way toward enhancing the effect of your work. Now, before we go, here's a review question to test your knowledge. Which of these statements about allusions is false? A. Allusions refer to previous events. B. Allusions can help simplify ideas. C. Allusions can make your writing more interesting. Or D. Allusions explain what they refer to for the reader. The correct answer is D. Remember, if you're having to explain your reference, it's not an allusion anymore.
Some may think poetry is just a way of confusing people. And yes, while it can oftentimes be more difficult to understand than a novel, my hope is that after this video, you'll have a better appreciation for poetry and may be able to actually enjoy it. Today, we're going to be working through the structure of poetry from largest to smallest. Let's begin with the superstructure of a poem, the form. According to the Poetry Archive, form in poetry can be understood as the physical structure of the poem, the length of the lines, their rhythms, their system of rhymes, and repetition. In this sense, it is normally reserved for the type of poem where these features have been shaped into a pattern, especially a familiar pattern. That is, there are many different kinds of poems, some of which don't really have any regular patterns. Many, however, do follow a pattern, especially classical and ancient poems. You may have heard of the term stanza. A stanza is a grouping of lines within a poem. The author of Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, was also a poet. His poem, The Crocodile, has 2 stanzas of 4 lines each. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws. Another type of poem is an acrostic, where the first letter of each line spells something. Isaac Watts, who was born in 1674, wrote an acrostic that spelled out his name when he was just 7 years old. I'm a vile, polluted lump of earth, so I've continued ever since my birth. Although Jehovah grace does daily give me, as sure this monster Satan will deceive me. Come, therefore, Lord, from Satan's claws relieve me. Wash me in thy blood, O Christ, and grace divine impart. Then search and try the corners of my heart, that I in all things may be fit to do service to thee and sing thy praises too. Moving smaller, let's discuss patterns within lines. One of these patterns is feet, which is related to meter. In poetry, a foot is a basic repeated sequence of meter composed of 2 or more accented or unaccented syllables. The accent is where the emphasis falls on the word, as in when you put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. There are 4 primary feet: iambic, as in the word destroy, anapestic, as in the word intervene, trochaic, as in the word topsy, and dactylic, as in the word merrily. A common foot and line length combination is iambic pentameter, which was generally how Shakespeare wrote. This means there are 5 unaccented or accented feet per line. Line length generally varies from 1 foot to 8 feet. You're forgiven if you're thinking I'm talking about buying lumber. Now, we get another layer smaller, with the structure of individual words known as meter. Paul Fussell, in his crucial book on poetry, defines meter as what results when the natural rhythmical movements of colloquial speech are heightened, organized, and regulated so that repetition emerges from the relative phonetic haphazard of ordinary utterance. Let's unpack that. What Fussell is talking about is organizing words so that they have a rhythm to them, like a song has rhythm. Think of a basic drum beat. In English, we accent words, which means that some syllables receive more emphasis than others. This creates opportunity to create rhythm. According to the Purdue Owl, there are 4 common ways to view meter: syllabic, a general counting of syllables per line; accentual, a counting of accents only per line. Syllables may vary between accents; accentual syllabic, a counting of syllables and accents; and quantitative, which measures the duration of words. So we've discussed the major structure of a poem, the lines and the words. Now let's talk about the smallest structural element of poetry, rhyming. According to the Poetry Foundation, a rhyme is the repetition of syllables, typically at the end of a verse line. And just to be confusing, there are several different types of rhymes. Eye or visual rhymes, which are words that look similar but are not pronounced similarly, as in the word flood and the word wood. End rhyme, the most common type, is the rhyming of the final syllables of a line, like in the previous example of crocodile and Nile. Feminine or slant rhyme applies to the rhyming of 1 or more unstressed syllables, such as dicing and enticing. Identical rhyme employs the same word, identically in sound and sense, twice in rhyming positions, like when Isaac Watts ended 2 of his lines from the earlier example with me. Internal rhyme is when a word from the middle of a line is rhymed with a word at the end of the line. Masculine rhyme describes those rhymes ending in a stressed syllable, such as hells and bells. It is the most common type of rhyme in English poetry. Monorhyme is the use of only 1 rhyme in a stanza. Forced or pararhyme is an unnatural rhyme that forces a rhyme where it should not otherwise be. For example, most of you will think that nothing rhymes with orange. The famous rapper Eminem vehemently disagrees and has forced orange to rhyme with many other words in his songs, like the following lines from Business. Set to blow college dorm room doors off the hinges, oranges, peach pears, plums, syringes, alliteration or head rhyme. This one is also self-explanatory. The first syllables rhyme. The careful cat burglar crept through the corridor. There's usually a pattern in poems with rhyming schemes, such as ABBA, ABBA, or CD, CD, CD. The individual letters represent lines that rhyme with each other. Up next, we have alliteration, assonance, consonants, and onomatopoeia. Assonance and consonants are similar to rhyme, but they're not quite the same. Because this is English, there's no black and white definition or categorization of these terms or of alliteration. Should they be categorized under rhyme? Depends on who you ask. Encyclopedia Britannica defines assonance as the repetition of stressed vowel sounds within words with different end consonants, as in the phrase quite like. Consonance is the recurrence or repetition of identical or similar consonants, specifically the correspondence of end or intermediate consonants, unaccompanied by like correspondence of vowels at the end of two or more syllables, words, or other units of composition. All of that mostly means that consonance is related to alliteration. Listen for the repeated L sounds in Emily Dickinson's poem 315. Your breath has time to straighten, your brain to bubble cool, deals one imperial thunderbolt that scalps your naked soul. Onomatopoeia is the term for a word that has been created to articulate a sound, such as thunder or the tick-tock of a clock. Using onomatopoeia is a way for a poet to use more sounds in their poems. All right, this is probably enough for one video. Remember, the form of the poem describes the overall patterns, the number and or length of lines, the stanzas, etc. The feet tell you how many patterns of syllables are within a line, and the meter is the rhythm of the words.
One way to better understand the meaning behind words is to look at the different parts of each word and understand each part's meaning separately, like squares in a patchwork quilt. Many English words are made by taking basic words and adding combinations to the beginning or end of the word to change the meaning. The basic word is called the root word, and the added portion is called the affix. There are three main affixes we use: prefixes, suffixes, and infixes. An affix added to the front of a word is known as a prefix. One added to the back of a word is the suffix. Guess where an infix appears? That's right, the middle of the word. Let's start by talking about prefixes. The four most common prefixes are dis, in, re, and un. Let me show you what I mean. The word form can mean to create something. If you add the prefix re to the beginning of the word, we get the word reform, which means to form over again. In fact, re is connected to an original Latin word which means again. If you add it to say or do, you would get the same effect. Re-say means to say something over again. Redo means to do something over again. Can you spot the prefix in the word disclaim? Dis is a Latin prefix that functions like a negative. Often, if you see dis, you can put not in its place. Discontent means not content. Disability means lacking ability. Disbelief means not believing, and so on. Disclaim means to not claim, to deny or refuse to acknowledge. Now that you have a good idea of what a prefix is, let's talk about suffixes. Like I mentioned before, an affix at the back of a word is a suffix. The four most common suffixes are ed, ing, ly, and es. Let's look at each of these suffixes attached to the root word love for illustration. If you added the first, you would get the word loved, a past tense verb of the root word. The second suffix gives us loving, the third lovely, and the fourth loves. Each suffix changes the meaning of the word slightly while maintaining the root meaning of the word love. Now let's talk about the third kind of affix, infixes. Infixes go inside the word. There are actually very few infixes in the English language, but you will see them with certain plural words. Let's look at the word cupful and the word passerby as examples. How would you make these two words plural? Contrary to what you may be used to saying, it's incorrect to say cupfuls and passerbys. The correct English plural for these words is cupsful and passersby. The infix s appears in the middle of both words. Before we leave our topics of affixes, let's talk about one area of grammar that often gets lumped into the affix category: combining forms. A combining form is a form of a word that only appears as a part of another word. Think of the word clockwise. Wise is an adverb combining form that helps tell us the direction of the action. And the word photograph, graph, is actually a noun combining form that tacks onto the word photo to make a new word. These aren't affixes exactly. They have more substance. Unlike affixes, combining forms can actually connect with an affix to form a real word. While you can't put dis and re together to make a word, you can put wise and ly together, and you'll get the word wisely. Overall, prefixes, suffixes, and infixes are small add-ons to root words. Combining forms are slightly larger add-ons that often have some standalone quality. Understanding the various parts of words like this helps us understand the overall meaning of the word. When you come upon a word you don't understand while reading, you have three options. You can choose to look it up in a dictionary, ignore it, or try to figure out what it means based on the context in which it's used. If you're in a test environment, you don't usually have the luxury of a dictionary, and it certainly isn't wise to ignore the word altogether. Therefore, it's a good skill to learn how a word's context can help you better understand what the word means. Searching for a word's context is as simple as looking at other words around the troublesome word. There are, in general, 5 main types of context clues: illustrations, synonyms, contrasts, inferences, and punctuation. The first context clues fall into the category of illustrations, examples or explanations of the word. This may seem overly simple, but difficult words are often followed by information the writer uses to explain the word's meaning. Look for words like such as, including, for instance, and like. This can be the author's way of further clarifying a difficult word, and you can sometimes make a logical guess about the word's meaning from the example alone. Take a look at this sentence. An occupation such as that of a hat maker or a postman is important for anyone who wants to earn a steady wage. In this sentence, we're looking at the word occupation. Not only is it a long word that we might not understand at first, but it also has multiple meanings. An occupation can mean a job, but it can also mean to take up space. It can even be used to talk about military invasion when one country is occupying another. When we look at the sentence, though, we see 2 examples given of the word in question. Neither a hat maker or a postman are particularly prone to occupying other countries, or at least that's not their primary purpose. So we can assume that the word occupation is referencing a job or employment opportunity. A second category of context clues is synonyms. A synonym is a word that shares a near meaning with another word. For example, loud and noisy mean similar things, but are 2 different words. Take a look at the following sentence to see how synonyms can be good context clues. The patient's hippocampus was an uncharted minefield. His memory was so bad, the psychiatrist wondered whether that part of the brain was even processing memory and emotion the way it should. Hippocampus is a very confusing word in this sentence. Right away, the word brain tells us that the hippocampus is likely a part of the brain. In fact, it's the part of the brain thought to be responsible for memory and emotion. The sentence says the psychiatrist was concerned the patient's memory and emotion weren't being processed the way it should be. So we can deduce that the hippocampus is responsible for those processes. The clue had both synonyms, the word brain, and a full reinstatement of the initial sentence that clarified what the hippocampus was. A third helpful context clue is the contrast or antonym clue. Antonyms are the opposite of synonyms. For example, hot and cold are antonyms. Sometimes contrast sentences can tell us what a word is not, and that in turn can give us an idea of what the word is. Look at this. Mary was known for having smooth skin, but to her horror, she woke up on her wedding day with a papule on her nose. Do you know what a papule is? Neither did I actually, but I can see the word but contrasting whatever it is with Mary's smooth skin. That, coupled with a clue about her nose, leads me to believe it is a zit of sorts, which in fact it is. A fourth clue to help you gain a bit of context surrounding words you don't understand is inference, or general context. This is a bit more vague of an explanation, but it basically means that sometimes we don't have clear synonyms or antonyms, and we don't have an illustration after the difficult word. Sometimes we just have to look at the paragraph as a whole and put a few floating parts together. This is best explained with an example. The haberdashery was Bob's favorite place. He bought all his suits there. The staff was friendly and always respectful. There's no direct description of what a haberdashery is, but the second sentence tells us that at the very least it sells suits. We also see that it's Bob's favorite place, so we can guess without certainty, but it's still a clue that it's a clothing place for men. The word staff couples with the word bought to let us know it's likely a store of some sort. The final helpful context clue is the clue of punctuation. Sometimes commas or quotation marks can be used to clarify the meaning of a word. Quotation marks can show the word has special meaning. Brackets can enclose additional explanation, and italics can further define a word. Think about the following. Matcha, Japanese green tea, has many health benefits. The parenthetical phrase gives a pretty clear description of what matcha is. In many ways, this kind of punctuation is the easiest context clue of all to deduce. These are the 5 main clues you can fall back on when trying to decipher the meaning of a difficult word. But in general, remember that when you come upon a word that isn't in your vocabulary, you don't have to give up. Paragraphs often hold together clues that can give you helpful hints about what the mystery word actually means.
Hi, and welcome to this video about capitalization. Today we'll be reviewing the most common capitalization rules in English and using some examples to see how to apply them. Often one of the first rules that people learn is that the first word in a sentence should always be capitalized. It doesn't matter if the sentence is a statement, a question, or an exclamation. Super simple. Another easy rule to remember is that the pronoun I will always be capitalized, even if it appears in the middle of a sentence. Proper nouns are also always capitalized. Remember, a proper noun is a noun that refers to a specific person, place, or organization. This includes things like titles, company names, sports teams, political groups, and more. For example, in this sentence, Kyle is capitalized because it's the name that refers to a specific person. Here, Pointville High School is capitalized because it's the name of a specific school. Now, in these examples, you wouldn't capitalize school or store because those words aren't naming a specific place. This same rule applies when you refer to family members by their family title, like mom, dad, or grandma. Let's take the word mom, for instance. If you wrote, "I asked Mom to drive us to the mall," the word mom would be capitalized because it's acting as the name of a specific person. It's a proper noun. However, if you wrote, "My mom works at an insurance company," the word mom would not be capitalized. In this case, mom is referring to her relationship to you as a family member. It's not referring to her by name. Titles that precede names work in a very similar way. They are capitalized when they're part of a person's name, but not when they're used as descriptors. Take the word mayor, for instance. You would capitalize mayor in the sentence, "Mayor Bob Jones will be speaking at 1 p.m." because it's part of his name. However, if you wrote, "Bob Jones, mayor of Huntsville, will be speaking at 1 p.m., you would not capitalize mayor because it's not part of the name of a specific person. Titles of published works are a bit more difficult. If you've ever had to reference the title of a book, an article, or other written work, chances are you've gotten stuck trying to remember which words to capitalize and which ones to leave uncapitalized. The rule for this is pretty simple. Capitalize all the major words except prepositions or articles, unless it is the first word of the title. Here are a few examples. Notice that the only prepositions and articles in these titles that are capitalized are the ones at the very beginning. All of the others are lowercase. All of the other words are considered important, so they're capitalized. Here are a few more super quick rules before we move on. Capitalize the days of the week. Capitalize holidays. Capitalize months. Capitalize directional regions of countries, but not compass directions. Okay, now that we've looked at words you should always capitalize, let's take a look at some that you should never capitalize unless they're the first word of a sentence or appear in a title. Do not capitalize the names of seasons. Do not capitalize the names of elements. Do not capitalize general animal names unless a proper adjective is included. For instance, you wouldn't capitalize black bear or red panda, but you would capitalize the G in German Shepherd. Do not capitalize the word the before proper nouns unless the article is part of the proper noun. Do not capitalize the first word that comes after a colon or semicolon. There are many, many more rules and exceptions to rules that I haven't mentioned. These are simply the most commonly used rules. I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching, and happy studying.